movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me from way out west-ish is Joshua Chad. Hey, Joshua, how are you doing today, man?
Hey, doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing all right. I see your background with the horse mural or whatever that is back there, and it just makes me think of you riding across the plains out there.
Yeah, no, it's funny because that's a blanket we got down in Mexico, and it's actually covering what is supposed to be our front door. But that front door in winter completely ices over on the inside.
Oh my!
So it's an old door, and so we figured out last year it's covered in a blanket. There's something underneath the blanket. There's all the seams are taped, and I'm just like, and we left it up there over the summer just because it's kind of a pain in the butt, and it kind of makes it adds to the aesthetic of a messy backdrop. I hope one of these times, like, I'll be down in my office and it's going to be a nice backdrop. I got these like flickering lanterns I bought, and it's going to be barnwood and rusted tin, and might be cool. 10 years, but it'll be nice.
We all have to have a dream.
Exactly. Because if I accepted that I would be here for, another year, I would probably pull my hair out, but well, not that I have much hair to pull out, but anyway, I just hope I could be down there.
Yeah, we're in the rearranging of the house. So as my daughter is moving back in, so there's like my office space is my haven of tidy-ish.
Yep.
I have stacks of books on the floor, yes, but I go out into the garage and it's just chaos all over the place. So I was like, no, this is the one place where I can find, it's my fortress of solitude, as if I was Superman. So Reign of Fire.
Such a good movie.
So why did you pick this? Rotten Tomatoes would disagree. I think
Rotten Tomatoes can
scores are in the 40s.
Yeah, I was looking at IMDb too, because we were looking up like when it was filmed. I think it was 2002, and it was like 4.7 out of 10. And I'm like, what are you doing, IMDb? Is it a whole bunch of just drunk people raging on here or what? Like, I mean, I don't know. Like I randomly discovered it back in when we still had like a local video store in our tiny little town, and they had it there, and I'm like, what's this? There's dragons. And I've always been a nerd. So I'm like, let's do it. And we went home and watched it. And I'm like, this is literally amazing. And it's still top 5 movies. Like, I mean, and I think it's Matthew McConaughey's best role ever. Like 100%. Like, oh, so good. So good.
Well, so that brings up the first thing I actually wanted to talk about, because I had never heard of this until several years ago. I was reading his autobiography, Green Lights. And he talks about this role. This was, he's coming off Life of Mr. Rom-Com. And he's like, I don't want to do that anymore. This was before The Reconnaissance. But he said some really funny stuff. First, he shaved his head, which freaked everyone out. His agent, the publicist, all the people are like, you did not shave your head. And he's like, yeah, man. In Matthew McConaughey's voice, which I don't do a good one. So, but he talks about the prep for the role of Van Zandt. So I wanted to read that from his book, Green Lights. And again, just listen. I know you're hearing my voice, but try to audibly picture, try to hear Matthew McConaughey's.
Yeah.
I had 2 months to prepare and train to become my man, Van Zandt. I needed isolation, so I decided to go out to my brother's ranch in West Texas, 17 miles outside the nearest town of 518 people. Very secluded, 1,500 acres, hot as hell in the middle of summer, a perfect place to prepare to slay dragons. Next up was devising my own original Dragon Slayer mind, body, and spirit daily workout regimen. What would a Dragon Slayer do? How would a Dragon Slayer train? I made a plan that would be executed in the mid-July 108-degree weather. So there are 4 steps to this. Number 1, take a double shot of tequila every morning at sunrise before I get out of bed. Yeah, a Dragon Slayer would do that. Have fire breath to beat the fire breather. Get the insides on fire first thing to start the day. To beat a dragon, be a dragon. Perfect. Number 2, run 5 miles across the desert daily, barefoot. 2.5 miles out, 2.5 miles back. Yeah, toughen up the soles of my feet. I've got tender feet now. I wear shoes. I've got to toughen up the soles of my feet. Plus, dragons have tough skin, and I have to become more like my prey. Yeah, dragon slayer like Van Zandt would have tough soles. Yeah, dragon slayer like Van Zandt would have tough soles, ward off infection. Brilliant. Number 3, keep my heart rate below 60 while standing on the edge of the barn's rooftop, overlooking a 40-foot drop onto the concrete below. Yeah, I'm afraid of heights, but Van Zandt wouldn't be. I'll do it every day until I can stand on my heels with my feet over the edge while holding a resting heart rate in the low 50s. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Number 4, run out into the pastures every night at midnight and tackle sleeping cows. Yeah, I'm going to full on tackle cows, knock them off their feet. I'll get thick, burly, strong. Yeah, that's what a dragon slayer would do. That's what Van Zandt will do. Deal. So how did it go? Well, on the 6th morning, I gagged up the double Cuervo shot that was awaiting me at bedside at sunrise. Then again on morning 7. Bad idea. Done. At midnight on my ninth day, a large bull headbutted me and gave me a concussion as I tried to wrestle him to the ground. Oops. After 11 days of running 5 miles barefoot across the rocky 108-degree hot desert sand and stones, oyster-sized blisters formed on the bottoms of my feet so big and so bubbled that I couldn't even walk, much less run. Uh-oh. And after 2 months of trying, I never got closer than 3 feet from the edge of that barn's rooftop. And even then, my heart rate never got lower than 125. Nice try. My Dragon Slayer workout regimen had failed miserably, but the upside was that I experienced a lot of pain, as any good Dragon Slayer would.
Oh, that's taking a roll to another level. That's, yeah.
I don't know which one is the craziest one.
Oh, I think the running barefoot. Like I could see tackling cows. I mean, that's pretty crazy, but cow tipping. I mean, once they're down, just don't get kicked. The rooftop would be, well, if you're afraid of heights, it's hard, but I mean, I could stand on the edge. The tequila would suck. Like, that would be the worst part. But like, dude, running barefoot, like I don't even walk barefoot in my house. So trying to go, I mean, even going outside, like I can't do concrete. Soft rug feels hard. So yeah, that would be it for me. Would be the running barefoot. Oh
yeah. Although the barn, being someone who does not like the heights, the barn would be, not pleasant.
Yep.
So that's the sort of intention and purpose that he went into this, to prepare for this role, this iconic role, right? When you think of McConaughey, don't you just think Van Zandt?
Dragon Slayer, American Dragon Slayer. Like, I tell you what, it's definitely that I can think of his most off the wall role, but I still think one of his best. Like, he did well, like, and I don't know, he just embraced it. I thought it was good. I mean, the only other one I can kind of think of that was similar, but it was still more McConaughey because there was more to humor, was when he played Dirk Pitt in Sahara. Like, that was more of a, kind of an out, like, adventure or whatever. Like, but that still felt like a McConaughey in that role. This feels like, I honestly, so back in the day when I first started watching this, I didn't care actors and actresses. It wasn't until like in the last, I don't know, several years when I'm like, that's that is Matthew McConaughey. Like, what? Right. And then even Gerard Butler, like, that's one of his early roles, I think. He didn't even make, like, in the trailer I watched.
Pudgy, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, Christian Bale is one of I would say one of the best actors of our time. Just how he embraces a role. I mean, you look at Fighter, you look at, I don't know, especially Fighter and some of those, like, oh.
He was good in that, the Terminator, that late Terminator one. Like,
I don't think
I sort of lost their way.
I've, to be fair, never seen a single Terminator.
Oh,
Yeah,
Have you
Sarah
told
Daniels. Oh no, that's a lie. That's a lie. I have seen the first one. Sarah Daniels made me watch it. We did a watch party.
Like, there's no way you're friends with Sarah and she
Yes,
has made you watch the first.
And it took us 3 years of being friends before she's like, okay, we are doing a watch party and you are watching this, because we were talking about her devotional she's working on and then her blog, and she's like, because I was reading the Terminator blog and I'm like, oh man, I can't read anymore because there's spoilers, and she's like, oh, we'll solve that. Like, we'll solve it. And it was great. I mean, I loved watching it, but I still haven't seen the original Aliens or the Predators. I've seen Alien versus Predator, which was really good, but it's just some of those classics kind of just, I like them, I think.
And there's like people come up to me and they're like, hey, you're the movie guy. Have you seen this? And I'm like, nope. And it's like they turn away in disgust and walk away in shame.
Oh, that's kind of like, my wife, I don't know. My family just grew up a bit differently. We watched a lot of movies, especially being in Alaska for the early years. And even when we were in Colorado, like in the winter, there's not a whole lot to do if you don't like snowmobile or trap or snowshoe, which I do none of. So we watched a lot of movies. And then I meet my wife and we have all these, my family has so many movie quotes. And she's like just sitting there with a stunned look on her face, like, what is going on? And I'm like, you haven't seen this or this or this? And she's like, Josh, I am a girl. Okay. I have a sister. I don't have any brothers. And my dad tried to get me to watch some of these and I didn't want to. And I'm like, well, you don't have a choice now. You are watching these. Like, and she always ends up loving them. Like she watched Reign of Fire before, but she watched it with me. We just finished it last night because it took us 2 nights because we got kids. You can't get through a full movie in a night. I hate it. But anyway, and she's like, this is a really good movie. Why haven't you made me watch this yet? I'm like, we have. Like, but it's funny. I get to introduce her to a lot of, like, I introduced her to Tombstone, and Lonesome Dove was actually, I didn't think she would like it. She really liked it because I realized it's mainly just a Western drama. Yeah. And she likes, emotions and characters and drama and stuff. But I mean, even like, okay, in my book, she hadn't seen Lord of the Rings. She's like, I've seen one of them, most of it. And I'm like, no, then you haven't seen any of them and you haven't seen any of it, especially if it wasn't the extended edition. It doesn't count. I'm sorry. Does not count. If you don't watch the extended edition, you're not doing it right. Like, there is one way to watch Lord of the Rings. That is the extended edition, and you watch them all in one. Okay. I used to do one day. We can't do that anymore either as kids. No. It took us
an hour and a half movie in one night. You're not getting through 12 hours.
Yeah, exactly. It literally took us, I think, 2 months the last time we watched through all the Hobbits and all the Lord of the Rings. Like,
oh, if you're throwing the Hobbit in there.
Yes. Cool. Oh yeah. I don't want to open up a can of worms there because that's all over the place, but we watch them first because there is enough. I think there's enough good in there to watch them till you get to the last one. And the last one's just like, anyway. But so we always watch them first. We never watch them second because watching them second after Lord of the Rings are just like garbage.
Yeah. It's like the wedding at Cana. Why do you bring out the good wine?
After everybody's drunk, they don't get to experience it.
Yeah, you bring out the cheap wine of the Hobbit, and then you bring out the good wine of the Lord of the Rings. You can't go backwards.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, but I don't know. I guess as fantasy movies go, I mean, it's worth watching. And the quality of Lord of the Rings, no. But anyway,
but this isn't a J.R.R. Tolkien fan blog, fanboy podcast. We're talking about the Reign of Fire.
Yes.
So you brought up an interesting, like, I watched it last night with my son, and you emailed me sometime today, and you emailed me and you compared how similar the dragons are to sin, which I thought was a very interesting take. And so I'm going to, give you the opportunity to support your supposition and say, okay, this is why, this is how we look at it. And we'll sort of dive into what that means, and we'll extrapolate it for the rest of the conversation here.
Sweet. Yeah. Cause as I was going into this, I went into it with the mindset of like, okay, I'm doing a podcast on this. That's why I was watching it again, even though it was on our to watch list anyway. again. Yeah. and so I was like, okay, what is in here? Like, why do I like it? What and there's a lot. There's always a lot. I could watch it again in 2 weeks and pull out something completely different. But I was just realizing they were talking. I think it was early on when Christian Bale, his character Quinn, was kind of given the narration of what happened and how the world ended and whatnot. And it's like it started with one dragon, and all of a sudden there were thousands of them. And I was just thinking about like, and as the movie went on, how you had these two different groups. The ones they were hiding. They were in pure survival mode. I mean, that's why there's some characters. I forget his name. I think it was Ed or Edward or
Eddie.
something. Eddie that wanted to leave. He's like, we're not living. We're just dying slowly. And Van Zandt says something like that later too. And I was like, okay, you got them, and then you got this group of dragon hunters. And that all they do is hunt dragons. Like you can see, that's all they do. They're militaristic to the point of extreme, where they conscript. There we go, not strip. Conscript some of the guys from the castle towards the end of the movie. And I was looking at these two places, and I think both of them are flawed. One, I'd say more so than the other, because when you're only focused on like a militaristic sense of like, I need to do this, like when, and anyway, I need to digress, get back to where I'm at. So looking at these as the movie went on, these two different groups, the line they said early on about how it started with one dragon and there were thousands. I'm like, that just struck me as like, that's how sin can work. Is like, and us especially giving into it. Like we give into one, or we just be complacent with just one little thing. And then all of a sudden, like it's before you know it, there's all these things. Our life, I mean, and it doesn't always work this way, but our life can head down a completely different trajectory, where instead of this one sin just multiplied before we know it in the hundreds, dozens, whatever the number is. And I was just like, wow. And it usually starts with one. It usually starts with, and usually a compromise internally, like, okay, this is okay. Like all this other stuff isn't, but this one thing is okay. And that just gives Satan a foothold. Just our sinful nature just to keep going. All they need is a foot in the door. And then it reminded me of, I mean, just like life is a battle. Like we live at war, and we as men are designed for war. I feel like, and in this day and age, that isn't just physical war, which I think there's a place for the military and all that, but like what every guy and girl can relate to is the supernatural spiritual war. Not so much, like we need to go fight demons literally, but like we are as Christians in a constant war. And I feel like we become complacent in that, and we become like Quinn and his group, where all of a sudden we're just complacent to the sin in our lives, and we're just not actively attacking. We're always on the defense, and the metaphor, simile, or parable or whatever it's not a one for one. Like there's definitely, different things, but like there's the sides where we can get complacent and we just let it in too much, and we just stop fighting, and you lost. You are not, there's a line, and I wish I would have thought of it before so I could look it up, but something like, as soon as you acknowledge that there is not a war, you are no longer a asset in that war for God. Like you're no longer, you're dead. You're fallen in battle, but you also can't go into it of like, I don't know, a militaristic sense of like, I don't even know how that would play out. I guess it turns into legalism, where it's like, I cannot do this and I can do this. Like you just have this list of cannot do's and can do's, and that's not a good place to be either. And there's a middle ground. Now, I do think we should always, I forget who says it, but be killing sin, or sin be killing you. John Piper quotes it from one of the older theologians. And I think that is true, but we can't look at it as just a list of things we shouldn't do. There is a relationship there. There is a progressive sanctification. There is an energy and a strength that we, no matter how much, we cannot just muscle up and do it on our own. So I think that's where, as the movie played out, I realized you had these two different camps of one where you could almost call it like, once again, similarities fall apart if you look into it too deeply, but kind of like a legalistic, don't sin, like just don't sin. Right. Like that is the number one goal of like, go out, hunt dragons, fight dragons, don't sin, but that's it, where that could be bad. Or just a complacency of like, oh, I just need to survive. I'm not doing good, I'm not really living out my faith, but at least, I'm not on the crack or out on the corner selling crack or doing crack. Like a life of complacency can be just as detrimental as, I mean, I don't want to say just as detrimental as addiction to drugs, but still, I mean, yeah.
Well, and that sort of goes even what Jesus says in Revelation, where it's like, I wish you were either hot or cold. Don't be lukewarm. I'll spit you out, and I've talked about that before. It's like, I like coffee hot. I also like iced coffee, but room temperature coffee is disgusting.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't even like coffee, and I agree. Or beer. I don't like beer, but I agree there too.
As you were talking, I was like, the problem with both sides of those as an approach is both sides are obsessed with dragons in this case, but both sides, their focus is on sin. I grew up in a super conservative church, and my interpretation of things was the ultimate goal of a Christian man is to not sin, which is it's not very motivating. And as you see, when you live that way, and I want to play our first clip, which is at the end of the night, they always say their prayers, which is interesting. And their prayers show their approach to the dragons in their world. And as with anything, allegories sort of, they don't always flesh out 100%, but that's why they're allegories. Otherwise, they just be the model.
Yep.
So again, looking at this as many believers' approach to sin, I think it helps kind of shape where our conversation's going.
All right, kids. Time for bed. Who's first? What do we do when we wake?
Keep both eyes on the side.
What do we do when we sleep?
Keep one eye on the sky.
What do we do when we see him?
Dig hard, dig deep,
Run for shelter and never look back. Well done, guys.
And I'm guessing that's sort of what bedtime at your house sounds like.
I was literally going to say, at first I'm like, man, did he record bedtime last night? No. And 2 kids sound like 80. Yes. Yep. I was literally thinking that as it was playing. Yep. Oh,
They go to bed with, in our interpretation of this, with sin on their mind. I got to watch out for sin. I got to watch out. You're afraid. And in your fear of not entering into sin, you don't live, because you're so focused on, again, the sin. You're so focused on what you can't do that you don't do anything. And that's what motivates somebody like Eddie to say, we're not eating. There's food down there. We need to eat, because I don't know if we're going to live till the harvest. And by no means, like Paul in Romans, am I saying go out and sin so grace may abound? By no means, right? We're not saying that, but there's an approach and a boldness, I believe, we should have as Christians when we approach this, that we should engage with sin and actually have some confidence and victory over it. Not just sort of live out every day of, man, I hope I don't sin.
yep. Because then if you do, I mean, that wrecks your whole day, because there's no room for grace. I mean, and I think like listen to that prayer again. I think the first part is really good. Like, stay vigilant. We are called to stay vigilant in the war. Right. And we are called to, and the biggest difference I think here too, is we are called to fight and stand firm, not to run and hide. Because I think that just mentality of running and hiding is either running and hiding from the sin, or when we do sin, we run and hide. I mean, that's just like Adam and Eve in the garden.
Right.
Like, I mean, and it's part of our fallen nature, and we will never have any sort of perfection this side of eternity. But there is like you said, there's a boldness when you are firm in your faith and you realize that Jesus died for all of our sins and that we need to keep our eyes on him. And I think that's where, kind of like you're alluding to, like, we shouldn't be focused on the sin. We should be focused on the Savior.
Yeah.
And if you're focused on the Savior, a lot of those sins just fall away. They lose their appeal. When we find our ultimate satisfaction and joy in Christ, we will always continue to sin, but a lot of the sin loses its luster, if you will, and we don't focus on it. It was either a sermon or a personal conversation I was having with one of the pastors, and he's like, why are you focusing on your sin? Like, why are you focusing on that? Yes, you should not do that. Yes, you should kill it, but why are you focusing on that instead of the cross, instead of the gospel and what Jesus did for you? And I'm like, oh, yeah, there needs to be a perspective change here. Like the sin is never a good thing. There should never be any acceptance of sin. There should always be repentance. But I mean, if we're focusing on it, like that, if we're focusing on sin, we've taken our eyes off of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I've been sort of engaged with this ministry. And if you've listened to the podcast with Whaler Giles, he's a part of that. It used to be Proven Men. Now it's just Proven, because they have ministries for women, but their whole focus is on creating men and women of sexual integrity. And I told him way back when, they have like their core program is a 12-week study, and it's intense, but it's not about, putting these guards on your phone or your guards on your computer. It's because, again, that's that looking at the sin, right? If you're that's sort of like always putting it in your face. But what it's saying is, hey, this is what life with Christ looks like. This is what union with God looks like. And sort of like eating, like, like even today, it's like I had my lunch, and then my grandson convinced me to buy these Little Debbie zebra rolls, which are like 270 calories per roll. And I gave in to the temptation, because I was like, this sounds good. I probably could have had one bite, and that's really all I needed. But I ate the whole thing, and immediately I'm like, I don't feel good. Like I don't know if it's my age or just my diet. Like I don't go out to eat burgers very much, because after eating those things, I don't feel good.
Yep. And
that's what sin should sort of do, is like, I don't want to do it, not because somebody tells me not to. I mean, it is God, so you can do that. But that's not really going to keep you from doing it. What's going to keep you from doing it is, that's crap. I want something better. Like, why am I going to eat something that's going to make me feel bad, that's going to mess up my relationships, when that is so much better? And so that's the approach that we're talking about, is, as you said, take your eyes off the sin and put it on the Savior. Like, why would I look at porn and jerk off knowing that it's going to impact my relationship with my wife? Like that's enough to defeat it. But I know, and I use that example because I know so many men that struggle with porn. Like, porn's a dragon for them. It's like, oh, I did it again. I did this thing I said I don't want to do. Why are you doing it? Because I don't have anything better to fill the gap.
Yep.
And so I want to play this next clip, because I think this is the mind shift that we take. This is when Van Zandt comes up to their castle, and he and Quinn are talking. Quinn's like, "What are you doing? Get out of here!" And the way that Van Zandt responds when he talks about an airplane and the skies is, I think, how it reveals a difference in attitude of that I think reflects the kingdom mindset.
You're responsible for this place.
Who are you?
Name's Van Zandt, Kentucky Irregulars.
You're a long way from home, Van Zandt. You lost?
Rebuilt the National Guard C-5A. Flew at 8,000 miles on 2 engines and tried to set it down on the old strip outside of Manchester. Lost 122 men and most of my fuel. We need shelter, a place to refit artillery. We'll be out of your hair by 1800 hours tomorrow.
That's a good story. Especially the bit about the plane, but there hasn't been anything in the air for 20 years. That's their territory.
That's my territory. That's your territory. They're just renting it.
Turn around, Van Zandt.
And that's our response when anybody says, oh, you can be free from that. Turn around, get out of here. This is my thorn in the flesh. This is my struggle. This is what keeps me humble. Right? Because it's like, we know we've been fighting it for years. It's like, that's their territory. My computer, that's sin's territory. My TV, my fridge, work, whatever you want to put. You can put whatever the sin is that is your particular struggle. It's like, oh, that's their territory. And Van Zandt says, that's my territory. That's your territory. Like, to me, it's what Paul says in Galatians. It is for freedom that Jesus set us free. And if we're free, there's no territory that's off limits.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like a defeatist mentality and just a wrong view of looking at it. Yeah. I like that. I mean, I picked up on that line in a movie, but like playing it right here, right now, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a really good line. It's probably one of the best lines in the movie. Like, yeah. And I mean, that's just it. I mean, through Christ, we have freedom. I mean, that's it. Freedom from every sin. And while that doesn't mean we will never sin as soon as we become Christians, it just means that we have freedom in that, and that one day we will experience ultimate freedom.
Right. What is it? I never remember if it's Morgan Snyder or Morgan quoting Dallas Willard or somebody like that, or Eugene Peterson. But this idea, like, God wants to create men and women who are mature enough that he can give them the desires of their heart. Because our hearts have become so aligned and so in union with God that we desire what God desires. And so when we desire something, God's like, yes, go after it. Yes, go for it. But because so many of us live broken lives in slavery, and I'm going to tell a super embarrassing story here, because I spent decades struggling with porn. In my search for intimacy and being seen, like that's the drug of choice ever since I was a young man, looking at Sears catalogs and National Geographics. It was that desperate. Told you this was an embarrassing story. And that morphed into chat rooms, and it led down dark places. The dragons took over my life. And fast forward, like I said, several decades, and I'm in my 30s now. I mean, I was, at the time of this happening, I was in my late 30s. And I remember my wife had gone, and I think she was just at work. I was at home on a day off or something, and I was like, oh man, I really want to look at porn. I was like, but why? Why do I want to do this? It's like, because I'm bored, because I'm angry at my wife and somehow want to punish her, because I'm looking for something that I think will feel better on the screen, but it's not. It's going to make me feel worse. And I just remember, like, I'm dealing with all this. I'm walking around the house, and I look down at my crotch, and I say, I am not your slave. It's a funny story, but something broke that day. Like, I was like, no, this is my territory. This is my kingdom. You don't control what I do or why I do it. I make those decisions. I'm not your slave. And that could, again, porn's the easy one because so many men struggle with it, and it's silent. It could be food for somebody. It could be achievement for somebody who's driven to achievement. And like, that's where they get their source of validation. It could be whatever it is that you hold on too tightly takes the place of God. Is the place where, as Jesus followers, we can take that territory back and say, I'm not your slave. That's not who I want to be. and work to create the person with God. But I think that we take that defeatist attitude of, this is just who I am. I'm just an addict. I'm a sex addict. I've had these traumas. I've got these wounds. I've got this brokenness. It's like, well, those are labels you're putting on yourself. But it's time to take that territory back. That's our territory. That's your territory. They've just been running it. It's time to kick out the squatters in your life.
Yeah. I mean, that just reminds me of, I think it's Ephesians 6:10, armor of God. I mean, just like how we're meant to suit up and stand firm. We shouldn't just keep giving ground, and I mean, even taking it back. And I mean, like you said, you had a good caveat there, is like with Christ, because apart from God, we're going to receive no lasting victory.
Right.
But with him and through his strength, through the strength that he powerfully works within me, or the energy he powerfully works within me, whatever it is, Colossians something. And I don't know, I got a lot of these fun verses I've been just trying to memorize lately, but I'm like, oh yeah, that's somewhere in the Bible, and I'll paraphrase it. That's a Josh. Instead of ESV, it's a JSV. But yeah, I mean, it really is to be able to just, and just like we were talking about earlier, taking our eyes off of that sin and putting it on Christ, like that alone can help. I mean, that restructures the whole battle, if you will. Instead of us fighting here bloodied on our knees, just swinging our sword at the air as the enemy just surrounds us, looking down on us, laughing at us, and we think we're defeated. But then if you look up, you realize the enemy is surrounded by a ring of an angelic host. I mean, you look at what was it, Elijah?
Yeah.
Yeah. When it's just like, what do you mean we're going to lose? Look. And his eyes were open and he saw the angelic host there, yeah. And so it's just like, as long as we are keeping our eyes either on the enemy or on ourself, on our sin, on our idols, on whatever shortcomings we have, it's going to look like we're fighting a losing battle. But spoiler alert, the victory has already been won. Like, it's over. I mean, Christ did that on the cross, and there's no going back. And so if we can just look to him, look to that, and just remember that, the whole battle just takes on a whole new light, that all of a sudden we're not defeated. And when we do fall, because we will continue to in some way, shape, or form, and we can get freedom from certain really hard holds and stuff. But I mean, there will be sin in our lives forever. And so when we do fall to that, we can actually look up now and see the hand that is ready to lift us up out of it, instead of thinking we got to somehow try and muster it up on our own, or just start crawling through the muck. So I think just that perspective shift, and especially I know for me personally, it's helped of like trying to keep a rule. And I love rules. I'm a rule type of person, but even just trying to keep a list of rules of don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And it's while we do need to still follow those rules, we're not following those rules for the sake of following those rules. We're following those because we want to, because we have this Savior, this relationship with Jesus. And part of that we're going to see is an outpouring of that. All of a sudden our life is conforming to that, even without us, expending a whole bunch of energy. Like we still do have to, fight and try, strive to run the race that he's set before us. But like all of a sudden, I mean, progressive sanctification, as we get more and more like him each day. I forget what it is, but we are receiving glory upon glory each day, or something like that, as we're becoming more like Christ. And so tell you what, just a perspective shift, it's really helped in my life, at least. And I think it probably will for most people.
Right. And I remember several years ago, my pastor preached a message, and he says, when we sin, when we go through, we do something that we know we shouldn't do. We steal from the grocery store. We tell lies to our friends, or whatever it is that's on the list of things that we shouldn't do. Right. And we feel guilty. And the super interesting thing, I've just learned this recently, is shame. If we feel shame about something, it actually increases that emotion, that tendency. So if I'm feeling sad and I feel shame because I'm sad, because I'm like, you shouldn't feel this way. What's wrong with you? You're so weak. You're so soft. You can't, your feet hurt walking on velvet. That actually makes you sadder. If you're angry and then are ashamed that you're angry, you become more angry.
Mm-hmm.
And you had mentioned this earlier, this idea like, oh, we sin and we think that we can't go to God. We've got to like serve some sort of penance, or it creates this distance. We go into hiding. Well, if we believe that Jesus' death over 2,000 years ago forgave us of our sins, the God over time, like we think that, well, it's when I gave my life to Christ, he forgave all the sins before that. He, my wild and woolly days when I was sowing my oats and all that stuff. Like he forgave those sins, but the sins in the future, like I got to do it all over again every time. It's like those sins are actually already forgiven as well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't feel like you can go to God, if you don't feel forgiven, you're listening to a lie. That was like a radical mindset change of, it's like, oh, you just, even if you don't feel forgiven, that doesn't mean you are.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times do we let those feelings guide us, especially in our relationship with God, where we act like God's just another dragon to be scared of?
Yep.
Like, oh, we made some noise, or somebody went out. We attacked the bridge, and now God's coming back for us with the fire and fury because we sinned once again. And I didn't pray a repentance prayer fast enough.
Well, yeah, because it's just, I mean, that's still living under the wrath of God, because there is wrath against sin, but we don't live under that anymore.
Right.
I mean, that's why Jesus came. I mean, and so, yeah, and you're exactly right. I had a really good thought that was there, and now it's gone. Crap.
Sorry, you could.
Oh,
you could,
yeah.
Cool.
I wish I need to have a Bible handy, but there's
why I have notes so that when ideas pop up, I write them down because I forget them so many times.
Smart. That is, I wish I was.
Well, I've done 160 something of these, so
fair enough. Yep, you should be well prepared. I've done 2 like this, anyways.
What verse are you thinking of?
See, that's the thing. I don't know the verse. I know kind of the context, but it's like, basically just like, because there is a place for confession and repentance, but it doesn't have to be this weird, I'm gonna rag on Catholics a little bit. It doesn't need to be this like, once a week we go to a confession. No, like it needs to be as close to the sin as possible. Like just an internal, hey God, I did this, forgive me. And he's faithful to forgive us. Like you said, that forgiveness is there. Like we just have to realize it, and then we have to believe it. There's a book that I'm reading, called Finally Free. It's actually about porn and, about how to get free from porn. And it's the first thing he's talking about is he's like, it's using God's grace to fight for purity. And it's like, we have, God's forgiving grace. We just need to ask for it and believe it's ours, just like you were saying. And then we have God's transforming grace that we have to ask for and believe it's ours, because that's what is going to keep us from going back to that sin is an inward transformation, is a new heart, as the Bible says. Like, and once again, it's not an overnight difference. Like, I mean, cause I'm like any other guy. I've struggled with porn. And there was a time when I thought it was completely beaten and gone. I mean, I went 2-3 years or something without any issues. And it came back. And so it was like, oh man, I'm not free anymore. And blah, 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 blah. No, those are still lies. That was just, I don't even know exactly how all of that stuff works, but it's like, okay, it's still like, there's still freedom there. There's still God's forgiveness there. It's a battle. It's a battle. And a battle's never easy. And the battle is won, has been won, but it is something we still have to fight in now, knowing that there's ultimate victory.
Like all the tenses.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's the theologians call it the already not yet.
Yeah,
how like we have this, like, I mean, like the inheritance, like we have that, but we don't quite have it fully, and so it's just like it's a hold it in tension.
Yeah. And I always love talking about the tension between different aspects. And as you mentioned, the tension of both of the approaches towards the dragons, of whether it's the people who are huddled hiding or the people who are like going after it. You talked about that. It reminded me, I went to a Christian high school, and I had a teacher who would hate this podcast because he's like, I haven't been to a movie theater in 29 years. Like thinking that was his mark of holiness and freedom. But he was like boasting about the fact he hadn't been to a movie theater because movies cause sin, I guess. Yeah, because they're rated R movies or something. I don't know. We deal with movies because our lives are rated R typically. If you're honest. So I have this last clip, and it's probably one of the best moments I think of the movie. As you mentioned, Matthew McConaughey showing his chops, his acting. This was a fantastic little monologue here. And I want to, again, go into this clip with the mindset of, if we look at the dragons as an allegory for sin and how they sort of guard our lives, and they had just, like, they had in the movie, they had just taken down a dragon, and so they were partying, they were celebrating, and he's going to come up and have some words. So they're partying, they're celebrating, and he comes up and he has this to tell them.
I say pity the country that needs them. What are you celebrating?
One dragon down,
3 men dead? Oh, yeah. At that rate, we might just be getting somewhere in about 320 years. Is that what you want? You want a little accommodation? These beasts live on ash. They feed on death. There's no middle ground. Not for them. Not for us. And sure as hell not for my men who died out there today. But you go ahead. Have your little soiree. Personally, you disgust me.
So, funny thing is, I was unsure why that clip was being played. I'm like, even if we should play that clip, I'm like, I don't know what it has to do with it. But there's words there in the middle where it talks about the dragons. They live on death. They live on ash. There is no middle ground. We can make no accommodation. And C.S. Lewis has a quote that that I think we've used before for Mere Christianity. And he says, God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol, gasoline for us non-British folks. That would not run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. God cannot give us a happiness and a peace apart from himself because it is not there. And that idea, like, so many times we make accommodations. We want to live in the middle ground. Because it's like, we know we don't want to live on the dark side. It's like, oh no, I shouldn't be, as you mentioned, selling crack on the street corner, or being a hooker, all those obvious things, right? Like, I just want to live in the middle ground. That other side, where you're living like that, where God is your source of life, of fuel, where you run on God as a car runs on fuel. It's like, that's for the super believers. That's for the super Christians. That's for the pastors and missionaries. It's like, no, we can't have happiness or peace apart from God, because that's the way he designed us. And when we see, it reminds me of the line and the scene from Braveheart, when the nobles were squabbling And he's just like, you've got to fight for your God-given right to freedom. My Paul paraphrase, because I don't remember the exact line. This idea, like, why are you squabbling in the mud? Why are you hiding in this castle? And somebody who just like is happy there is just, nope, I'm a sex addict. I'm just going to struggle with porn. That's all I'm ever going to do. The "you disgust me" words are probably a little harsh here, but it's like, there's so much more that's available to you if you just, as you mentioned, again, going back to what you said at the beginning, if you just put your eyes on the Savior and just pursue him with everything that's inside of you, then you'll find, then you'll, as he said in the beginning, envy the nation that has heroes. Then you'll be the hero. You'll find the freedom that you'll take back that territory that's rightfully yours.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, that line when he says that they feed on ash and death, it just made me think of James 1, where he's talking about temptation leads to sin and sin leads to death. Which is just like, because I mean, that's exactly what sin feeds on, is death, and sin causes death, and it's just an endless cycle. Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. The "you disgust me" line is a little harsh, but it is true. I mean, just like Jesus says, I think we were talking about before we recorded. If not, you can cut it and splice it in where it needs to be. But about in Revelation, how Jesus talks about lukewarm, and that's just so true. I mean, hot or cold, like I don't know. I'm a black or white kind of person, and this gets me into more trouble than it does anything else.
Oh, sure.
But if I'm going to do something, I'm all in. So it's like, just do it. Like, don't do anything half-assed. Like, it's just there's a place for that. There's a place for compromise, but there's very rarely a place for half-assery. I mean, there's just not. I mean, and compromise, I think, is different. That's a more mature way of doing it. But like, if you're gonna, I mean, and the same,
your whole ass.
Yeah, exactly. Do it with your, yeah. I need to make a bumper sticker that says, "Do it with your whole ass."
Well, and it's funny, going back to green lights, this is something I've talked with my boy, and we listened to this a few years ago, going down to the beach. And he's telling the story of how he was going to college. He was going to be a lawyer. And he's in school, and he realizes what he wants to do is pursue a film career. He wants to go, there's a film school, I think it went to University of Texas. And so, but he was nervous because all his life, his dad had sort of prepared him. This is what the goal of his life was. And so he had the opportunity. He called him and said, "Hey, Dad, this is what I want to do." And his dad said, "Okay, son, just don't half-ass it." So again, coming back full circle to green lights, that idea of, I love that. If you look at the Revelation where Jesus says that lukewarm thing is, "I'll spit you out of my mouth." It's disgusting. You disgust me. And that's not me and Joshua saying this. It's Jesus.
Yep.
So how are you going to? Yeah.
Well, it just ties in perfectly to the quote we did. I mean, the scene we just listened to, I mean, exactly ties into it. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
So our question becomes, how do you, because obviously we don't want to be cold. We don't want to follow the dragons. How do we live a life that's hot? Well, it's going to take, Jesus says, is you've got to lay down your life. It's like, no, you've got freedom. Stop letting sin, stop letting the dragons dominate your life, dominate your way of thinking, and take back the territory that's rightfully yours as a son or a daughter of God.
Yeah, I can't think about anything about, like, fighting sin without hearing John Piper in my head just being like, kill sin, and it's true. And there's different ways, shapes, or form, but I think we've touched on a lot. Is, I mean, looking up is I would say the first step in anything. Like, I notice, and our I've talked to several people in our church, and one of our pastors, elders, whatever, he's just like, well, he's like, "Josh, you're struggling. Like, where are you focused? What are you focused on?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure out what to do for money and finances." And he's like, you're not focused on Christ. And I'm like, I'm reading my Bible every morning. He's like, but your focus is wrong. And I'm like, dang it, he's right. And it's, I mean,
yeah. I felt the same way with all this stuff, rearranging the house and the chaos that I feel like is invading the stress of my to-do list that keeps growing. I call it the Hydra list. For everything I take off, 2 more get added on.
That is amazing. That is literally what mine is like too.
But what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on your list, or are you focusing on Jesus? And I'm developing the practice, because it's still new. When I feel like this, like I told my wife, it's like, I just feel anxious and all the things, just stressed out, that's a great time to turn on some worship music and sit down until you sort of allow Jesus to enter into those places. That's another great prayer to say, Jesus, enter this place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's remarkable how that shifts the atmosphere in a relatively short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
You take back that territory. It's like, no, this dinner with my family is my territory. I'm not going to let anxiety and stress take that space. They can't even rent it anymore. Kick out the squatters.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Go kill the dragon. Send it packing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just see, like, for me lately, thinking about this, because I mean, porn is definitely, like we said, it's our pastor always calls it low hanging fruit. He's like, it's all guys struggle with it. It's just an easy one to pick on, but like for me, it's a lot of times it's work, and not even so much work, because we're meant to work, of course, in some way, shape, or form, and that varies depending on situational, kids and all that. But anyway, and I just let that, like, that's the dragon that I'm just hiding from. I'm just putting up with. And it's like, cause you were talking about, I really liked what you said about, like, I'm not going to let anxiety like come into the territory of my dinner. And I'm thinking, like, yeah, dinner time for me is usually me basically trying to be done with work for the day. Cause after dinner is supposed to be with the kids and wife. And generally it is, I've been fighting to keep that kind of sacred. But dinner time itself is usually me looking at what I wanted to get done that day, and very rarely being satisfied, and more usually just being like, well, I didn't get this done, and I didn't get this done, and then this thing came up that I wasn't planning on, and this thing ended up taking longer because it actually entailed me to do 3 other things.
Right.
Like, that's usually dinner time. It's not a place of that's a great time that we want to start building habits with our young boys of, like, reading a small Bible story, or we always pray with them, but like starting some of those like intentional biblical teaching times, because right before bed is just explosion. It's like we heard earlier. Yeah, exactly. So dinner time is usually it's just me being frustrated that I didn't get done everything I thought needed to be done. See, it's not the stuff I aimed to do. It's the stuff that needed to be done. And once again, I took my eyes off of Christ and glorifying him today, like doing what I can do to glorify him today in doing my other work and stuff. And instead saw the little notes that I have scribbled on the Friday thing on my to-do list. Cause it's in my to-do list. Oh, it's fun. I'll just do this a little bit. So you got all this. And then you got the day, which, okay, people are listening to this. So it's a sheet of paper that has every day of the week that has normally it has 4 or 5 sticky notes tacked on there as well. Yeah, there's another one for next week.
Because what you write on there is enough. You have to have sticky notes.
Yeah, exactly. I've got all this filled, and then I got a sticky note that I thought of later, and it just adds, and it's just like, I mean, and I especially just get too caught up in that, in the idol of working, of achievement. Like, it's just like, oh, I got to get this done. And part of that is, I mean, financially we're pretty tight, so I feel like I need to buckle down. But at the end of the day, we were talking about a little bit before we started recording, of just like, God's going to provide. He already did. I mean, we've been praying for provision, and he provided. It wasn't exactly ideal for what I wanted. It's going to be hard, but he's going to provide for us financially. And so it's just once again, when focus too much on the dragon, focus too much on either the sin or the hardships and the trials, and we focus too much on that. It's just, our eyes are meant to be in one place, like you said with this Lewis quote. Our eyes are meant to run on one thing, and that's God. Period.
Well, even that throws in the shame, because then you're like, look at these things I didn't do. I had these 5 things I wanted to do. I got 1 done. And so you're sitting there in shame. So that's increasing your anxiety. And especially the pressure of, I need to be present for my kids and I'm sucking at it, and more shame, more like the dragons, multiply in their growth and their reproduction. And to be able to be like, to step back and to say, no, wait, this isn't the experience I want my children to have. Even to go back and I love what you said about the to-do list, and even the job thing is like, I didn't do these. And I've shared this a couple of times. Like in my journal last year, I wrote, all I see is all I haven't done. What a terrible way to live. But we do, right? And we measure it, but it's like, what if I go into the day of, did I do what God invited me to do today? Can I rest in that? Can that be enough? Can, this job that's going to take you to Alaska, that's not the job you wanted, but that's the job that's being offered. There's a purpose. How can you grasp hold of the purpose he has for you as you go live in a tent?
And hunt bears.
And hunt bears.
And it's funny because, exactly. At first I'm just like, really? This is hard. Like, it's never easy when you're living in a tent for 21 days. And talking to literally 2 guys the whole time, one at a time. So just me and one other guy surrounded by dozens of bears that are coming out of hibernation and really hungry. Which maybe that's another movie we might need to do in the future. Have you done The Edge yet?
No.
Oh, it's Anthony Hopkins. It's a story about a man-eating bear. Really good one. That's one of the few R-rated movies I watched before I was ever a teenager. Ghost in the Darkness and The Edge.
Oh yeah, that was a good one too.
Yeah. But yeah, and exactly like you said, is how can I not necessarily where's God in this, because he's everywhere at all times, but like, what can I pull out of this? And already I'm starting to look at that job of like, okay, it's going to take me away from my family for a month, which is going to be hard. At first, it's going to be like, this is awesome. It's quiet. And that's going to last for like all of like 2 days. And I'm going to be like, oh man, I miss everybody. Right. And, but it's like, how can we use this for, to strengthen my wife and I's relationship, our relationship with God. And like my time in Alaska, though it is very, very tough physically and even mentally. And, but it's usually, it can be a spiritual retreat. And so looking at it like, in this time where I don't get to guide much anymore, and this might be one of my last opportunities, like it's a blessing. Not only is it a blessing monetarily wise, but like just in a whole bunch of other ways.
No, and that's again, you're taking that territory back. It's like, no, you're looking at the opportunity that's being provided, not the hardship, because things are going to be hard. Even my daughter moving in, I'm like 75% excited and 25% dreading it, because it's like, there's going to be complications and somebody around all the time. And like, I like to walk around that house naked sometimes, and that time's gone.
Yep. That's one of the great things of being an empty nester, and you're gonna miss out on it. It'll come back.
Right. And yeah, that's the thing is like, well, what's my territory for today? And what are the dragons trying to steal? And how can you get that territory back? I think it's a good closing point for us.
And I think how do you take it back? How do you fight in a way that doesn't keep your focus entirely on the dragon, where you do like Van Zandt does at the end and go and get a bunch of people killed because he was just so focused on the killing the dragon instead of, I don't know where that metaphor goes, but anyway, how do you need to like take that territory back and defeat the dragons without becoming solely focused on them, which like we talked about.
Well, he didn't listen, right? He didn't.
Yeah.
Like even when they go back and he's like, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to do this at this time. When you said they're weakest, like he let his passion for killing the dragon override the concept of how to do it effectively.
Yep.
And it costs.
Yeah. Yep. And I love, there's one line in there. I don't know if it really plays into anything here, but I really just liked the change of like when Quinn goes to like when he's kind of at the graveyard and he's like, hey, like, what are you doing here? And McConaughey, Van Zandt is like, I'll lead, you follow.
Oh yeah,
and then
yeah.
he went and he talked to him. And then at the end, when they're going in to defeat him at the end, he looked at Quinn and he's like, you lead, we'll follow.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, like there was just a cool shift there. I don't know if it has any, like, you know, to the conversation, any adds anything, but I just really like that shift of like, yeah. And I guess there was, because it's, I mean, the other small thing I thought about was like, you know, pride cometh before a fall. And like, he was proud when he went in to try and defeat the dragon the first time and he fell. And then the second time, how he was humble. And I guess there's an extra little tidbit lesson in there.
That's the bonus content.
Yeah.
Well, and I think even like if that approach of my day, getting my list, that's like so many times I tell Jesus to follow. I lead, you follow. Here's what I want to get done today. And instead it's waking up in the morning and saying, you lead, I'll follow.
Yep.
And that's the way to actually effectively kill the dragons.
Yep. And that's exactly like you said with the desires of your heart. Like the more our hearts become aligned with Christ, the more we will get the desires of our heart, because our heart is becoming more aligned with what Christ is, who he is, and what he has for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, Joshua, thank you for joining me on the podcast today, talking about a Rotten Tomatoes middling movie, but something that we both enjoy.
Classic. It's amazing.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Joshua Chad talking about Reign of Fire. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.